I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
King Charles did not raise his voice when he delivered the order. He did not need to. With a newly uncovered lease file resting between them, the monarch looked directly at Camilla and demanded that she vacate Royal Lodge. The words were calm, precise, and devastating. What had begun as a private review of royal properties had exposed an arrangement the king had never personally approved, and within minutes, a marital dispute became a constitutional humiliation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles received the file during a quiet morning briefing, when his private secretary placed the sealed folder on the desk and asked him to read the final page. Royal Lodge, a crown-controlled residence whose occupancy requires formal approval, carried an amended clause granting Camilla long-term access and household privileges. His signature was missing. The king read the clause twice. Then he noticed the handwritten authorization mark beside it. It looked official, but it was not his. Someone inside the royal household had used the language of royal consent without the monarch's approval, turning a private arrangement into a threat to the crown's authority. Camilla entered believing the meeting concerned routine household matters. She sat calmly until Charles pushed the lease toward her and asked why his name did not appear beside the amendment. The queen consort's face tightened. She glanced at the page, then at him, and said nothing. Charles demanded a direct answer. Instead, she told him Royal Lodge had been promised to her during an earlier private conversation. The king felt the words land like betrayal. He had defended her through years of public anger, yet now she appeared to have accepted permanent rights built upon a promise he could not remember making. Camilla felt cornered by the one person whose loyalty she believed would never turn against her. Still, she refused to name who had arranged the clause. Charles made the decision final. She would vacate Royal Lodge, surrender every private key, and remove her staff within 72 hours. The room went silent. Charles lifted a brass key from the table, placed it inside a small wooden box, and closed the lid. Camilla watched without blinking. Then she rose, faced him, and warned that forcing her out would expose a truth capable of damaging someone far closer to the throne than he understood. The eviction order had been delivered, but the silence Camilla left behind carried a warning. Royal Lodge was not merely a house, it was the center of a private bargain that could divide the royal family and shake its future foundations. For decades, Charles and Camilla had survived scandal, rejection, and the judgment of a nation. Yet the threat now facing them did not come from the public. It came from inside their own marriage. Royal Lodge had become more than a residence. To the queen consort, it represented security and permanence. To the king, the hidden lease represented something far darker, proof that the woman beside him had allowed private ambition to cross a royal boundary. Camilla sat alone after the confrontation, gripping the armrest as though it were the only stable thing left in her world. Royal Lodge had been her refuge from the pressure of palace life, a place where she could hold private meetings, welcome family, and escape the constant weight of royal duty. She had treated it as a home. Charles had treated it as a temporary privilege. The difference now threatened everything. The queen consort had believed the residence offered protection against an uncertain future. The king had allowed her growing attachment because he believed every arrangement remained under his control. A royal lease, the formal agreement setting out who may occupy a crown residence and under what conditions, was never meant to be altered through private understanding alone. Charles entered his study still angry, but the anger did not last. He lowered himself into a chair and stared at the darkened fireplace, knowing that royal discipline could cost him the relationship he had spent much of his life defending. The monarch had protected Camilla against public hostility. Now he feared he might have to protect the crown from her choices. William heard the strain immediately when his father called. The Prince of Wales, the title given to the monarch's direct heir, listened without interrupting as Charles explained that someone may have used the king's name to approve the lease. When the call ended, William remained beside the window, silent and unsettled. Catherine noticed the change in him. She asked what had happened, and the prince admitted that Charles had ordered Camilla to leave Royal Lodge. He also revealed that the disputed amendment might contain unauthorized royal approval. The princess understood at once why the discovery was so dangerous. This was no longer only about property. It was about whether someone inside the household had learned to imitate the monarch's authority. William then remembered something Camilla had said months earlier. During a family gathering, the queen consort had called Royal Lodge her protected residence. At the time, he dismissed the phrase. Now it sounded deliberate, almost legal. A senior courtier soon confirmed the suspicion through a recorded internal briefing. Several members of Camilla's staff had begun moving private belongings into the residence before the amendment was officially registered. Someone had expected the arrangement to survive scrutiny. Camilla refused to accept that the matter was settled. When an aide asked which belongings should be packed first, she looked toward a framed photograph of Charles and answered, "Nothing moves until he speaks to me again." William made his decision. He would examine the timeline himself, unaware that one private family occasion had created the promise behind the lease. The king believed he had discovered a secret clause, but William was about to uncover the conversation that transformed reassurance into a royal claim. Every royal crisis has a moment that appears harmless when it happens. A quiet sentence, a sympathetic gesture, a promise made without witnesses who understand its true importance. In this case, the point of no return came during a private family gathering at Balmoral, when Charles was exhausted. Camilla felt uncertain about her future, and one trusted courtier offered to turn a husband's words of reassurance into something far more permanent than either of them openly acknowledged. 6 months before the Lease discovery, Charles and Camilla had arrived at Balmoral after a difficult week of public duties and private arguments about royal residences. Balmoral, the monarch's private Scottish estate used for family retreats and official gatherings, was supposed to offer relief. Instead, it became the place where fear quietly entered their marriage. Camilla worried about what would happen after William inherited the throne. She feared the future king might reorganize the household, reduce her independence, and leave her without a secure residence of her own. Charles listened with sympathy, believing she needed comfort rather than a legal guarantee. The private conversation changed everything. After dinner, Camilla stood with the king beside the library fireplace and admitted that she felt temporary, even after years beside him. Charles tried to calm her. "You will always have Royal Lodge available when you need it," he said. Camilla heard permanence in those words. The queen consort believed her husband had made a binding promise. Charles meant only that she would never be abandoned. He had not approved permanent occupancy, nor had he authorized anyone to place the assurance into a formal lease. Sir Malcolm Vane heard enough of the exchange to understand her fear. The senior property advisor later approached Camilla's private secretary and said the king's wishes should be placed beyond future interference. His statement was preserved in a documented internal account, written after the lease investigation began. 3 days later, Sir Malcolm produced a revised lease schedule. A lease schedule was the section of the agreement listing the rights attached to a residence, including who could live there and for how long. The new wording changed temporary access into a protected entitlement, linked directly to Camilla's household. The amendment carried a handwritten authorization code, copied from an earlier property instruction. That mark made the change appear approved, and allowed it to pass through internal review without Charles seeing it. Camilla hesitated when Sir Malcolm presented the terms during a private meeting. He assured her that the document merely gave legal form to what the king had already promised. She took the pen, signed the occupancy acknowledgement, then held it above the page for several seconds before setting it down. William later found the detail that broke the entire arrangement open. The amendment had been registered the morning after Charles left Balmoral. The monarch had not even been present when his supposed authorization entered the official record. William returned the file to his father and advised him to confront Camilla alone. The lease had begun with a sentence spoken in tenderness, but its consequences would now be decided in a room where tenderness had almost completely disappeared. When Camilla entered the king's private sitting room, No secretaries waited beside the walls. No legal advisors occupied the adjoining chamber. Charles had ordered everyone out. For the first time since the discovery, husband and wife faced each other without the protection of titles or ceremony. On the table rested the lease, the copied authorization code, and the key she had been commanded to surrender. Only one question remained: had she knowingly deceived him? Charles had arranged the meeting after confirming that the amendment came from his informal Balmoral promise, not from any official written instruction. A royal authorization was the formal approval required before a private wish could become an enforceable decision. He had given no such approval. Camilla still entered believing she could persuade him to reverse the eviction before the 72-hour deadline expired. The king did not soften the question. "Did you know I had never approved this clause?" he asked. Camilla looked down at the lease, then back at him. She said she believed his promise at Balmoral had been approval enough. Charles felt something inside him break. He accused her of allowing affection to be converted into authority. A husband's reassurance, he told her, could not be used to bypass the monarch's formal consent. The queen consort answered with pain rather than anger. She had spent years being treated as temporary, unwelcome, and tolerated. Royal Lodge was the first place she believed could never be taken from her. Camilla's voice weakened as she spoke, and tears began forming in her eyes. The king's anger faltered for one brief moment. Then she admitted that Sir Malcolm had arranged the amendment after a request from her private secretary. Charles hardened again. The queen insisted she had never ordered anyone to copy the authorization code. She believed the paperwork had passed through normal palace channels. Charles then revealed what the internal property record showed. Members of her staff had started moving private possessions into Royal Lodge before the revised clause was officially registered. That detail changed the room. The king asked how her household could prepare for permanent occupation before approval existed. Camilla said her staff had acted on Sir Malcolm's assurance. Charles replied that confidence was not consent, and expectation was not permission. Camilla placed her key on the table, but kept 2 fingers resting on it. The monarch said nothing. He simply waited. After several long seconds, she withdrew her hand. Charles refused to cancel the eviction. Still, he granted her 1 additional day to remove her belongings quietly and with dignity. The queen rose without thanking him. Camilla reached the doorway before the king spoke again. Sir Malcolm had been summoned, he said, and the investigation would now decide whether she had been manipulated or protected. Their marriage had survived the confrontation, but barely. Now the fate of the queen consort's reputation depended on the man who had transformed a private promise into royal paperwork. Palaces are not controlled by affection. They are controlled by signatures, seals, codes, and individuals who understand how to move decisions through silent corridors. Sir Malcolm Vane had spent years mastering that machinery. He knew which office would question an amendment, which clerk would accept an inherited authorization mark, and which phrase could make a private wish appear to be a royal command. But when he entered the king's presence, that knowledge no longer protected him. Sir Malcolm oversaw property arrangements involving royal residences and held access to old approval records used for maintenance, security, and occupancy decisions. A delegated representative was someone formally authorized to act in the monarch's name, and he had never received that power for permanent residence rights. He could prepare the amendment. He could not lawfully approve it. Charles watched him enter with a calm face. The advisor appeared composed, but his hands tightened around the back of a chair when the king placed the copied authorization code before him. William stood nearby at his father's request, saying nothing at first. The king asked the question without mercy. Had loyalty to Camilla become more important than duty to the crown? Sir Malcolm answered that he had acted to protect the queen consort from future uncertainty. He claimed she feared losing her home after a change of reign, and he believed the Balmoral promise expressed Charles's true wishes. William rejected that defense immediately. The prince said protecting one royal by weakening the sovereign's authority endangered every person connected to the institution. A succession clause, the part of an agreement designed to remain effective after a new monarch takes the throne, could not be hidden inside a lease simply to control the next reign. Sir Malcolm finally admitted the deeper truth. Camilla's private secretary had asked him to ensure the promise could not be reversed after Charles was gone. The advisor then revealed through the recorded palace interview that the lease had been designed to survive even if William later reorganized royal residences. The future king understood at once. This was not only about giving Camilla security, it was about limiting his authority before he ever inherited the crown. William pushed the lease slowly across the table and asked Sir Malcolm to read the succession clause aloud. The advisor began, then stopped halfway through. He knew the meaning had been exposed. Charles suspended him immediately. The king ordered the amendment voided and placed every property decision connected to Camilla's household under direct review. Sir Malcolm tried to explain again, but the monarch dismissed him with a single command. Charles sat heavily after the door closed. He admitted to William that the arrangement had forced him to choose between protecting his wife and preserving trust in the crown. The prince remained silent, knowing no answer could soften that truth. Then an urgent message arrived. Camilla's staff had been denied entry to part of Royal Lodge, and the queen consort was already on her way there. The disputed clause had been destroyed inside the palace. But at Royal Lodge, the consequences were becoming physical, immediate, and impossible to hide. Camilla arrived at Royal Lodge expecting discomfort. She did not expect to find the side entrance locked. 2 security officers stood beside the doorway, while members of her household waited outside with empty cases and restrained expressions. For years, she had entered the residence without hesitation. Now she was required to identify every room she wished to access. The eviction order was no longer a sentence spoken by Charles. It had become a locked door. Camilla stepped toward the entrance and pressed her electronic key against the panel. Nothing happened. She tried again, slower this time, before one officer quietly explained that the code had been disabled. Supervised access meant she could enter only with security present, and only to remove approved personal belongings. The rule was clear. Her control over the house had ended. The queen consort felt the humiliation immediately. Employees who once treated Royal Lodge as her private refuge now waited for instructions from palace officials. Her household offices, storage rooms, and living spaces had to be cleared before the extended deadline expired. Every delay would make the eviction more public, and every packed case reminded her that permanence had vanished overnight. Camilla's anger broke through when an aide began wrapping framed family photographs. She ordered the woman to stop, then saw one image of Charles among them. Her voice softened. She took the photograph herself and insisted on wrapping it carefully, as though protecting the image could preserve something the lease crisis had already damaged. The silence inside became unbearable. Camilla sat alone in the drawing room, while footsteps moved through nearby corridors, and case lids closed one after another. She had imagined Royal Lodge as her future shelter. Now each sound marked the dismantling of that belief. The discovery soon widened. Staff found furnishings transferred from another royal residence without a completed inventory, the official record used to show where Crown-owned items belong. A sealed cabinet also contained correspondence between Sir Malcolm and Camilla's private secretary. The documented letters discussed how to preserve her household after William became king. Camilla watched as an official removed a nameplate bearing her household designation from an office door. He placed it face down on a table. She did not protest. By then, the meaning was too clear. Her private secretary was suspended pending review, leaving the queen consort isolated from the very people who had encouraged the arrangement. At the palace, Charles received confirmation that Royal Lodge had been secured. The king closed his eyes briefly, but when an advisor suggested softening the order, he refused. Camilla made one final decision that evening. She requested a private meeting, not with Charles, but with William. Royal Lodge had been taken from her, yet she still possessed one choice: defend the secret arrangement to the future king, or admit why she had feared his reign so deeply. There were no officials in the room when Camilla met William. No property files. No advisors prepared to interrupt. She had requested the conversation because the lease had been written partly to protect her from him. and both of them understood that pretending otherwise would be pointless. William arrived guarded and unsmiling. Camilla remained seated until he entered, then rose slowly and told the future king the one truth she had never dared to say aloud. William had agreed to the meeting only after Charles confirmed that Royal Lodge had already been surrendered. The residence could no longer be used as leverage, and the eviction order could not be delayed. A future king is the heir expected to inherit both the crown and its full authority, which meant any attempt to restrict his later decisions carried consequences far beyond a family argument. Camilla did not begin with excuses. She admitted that the amendment had been designed to survive Charles's reign. The queen consort said she feared William would one day remove every trace of her royal standing in order to restore the memory of Diana. William reacted at once. Anger sharpened his voice as he insisted that loyalty to his mother had never required humiliating Camilla or leaving her without security. The prince told her she had mistaken grief for revenge, and in doing so she had allowed fear to shape a decision that weakened trust. Camilla accepted the accusation. She explained through their private recorded conversation that fear, not entitlement alone, had made Sir Malcolm's promise so powerful. The advisor had assured her that the lease would protect her future, and she had wanted to believe him. The queen then confessed something even harder. She knew the arrangement had crossed a procedural line. She understood that Charles's words at Balmoral were personal reassurance, not formal approval. Still, she convinced herself that the promise justified the protection. William answered with cold honesty. The deepest damage was not the house. It was the attempt to bind his authority before he inherited responsibility for the monarchy. The future king could forgive fear, but he could not ignore an arrangement designed to control his reign in advance. Camilla reached into her handbag and removed a small spare key. She placed it between them and admitted she should have surrendered it before Charles was forced to ask. William did not excuse her actions. Yet his anger began to shift into quiet resolve. He promised that when the time came, she would have a secure private residence governed by clear, transparent terms rather than hidden protections. Camilla thanked him without asking for Royal Lodge back. For the first time, she accepted that dignity would require surrender rather than resistance. Their private understanding came just as the palace prepared to acknowledge the eviction publicly. Inside the room, fear had finally given way to honesty. Outside it, the country was about to decide whether the king's order represented cruelty, courage, or the rebirth of royal discipline. By sunrise, the story could no longer be contained. The royal household issued a carefully worded statement, confirming that Camilla's residential access to Royal Lodge had ended following an internal property review. It did not mention the copied authorization code. It did not describe the confrontation with Charles. Yet the meaning was unmistakable. A reigning king had ordered his own wife from a royal residence, and by mid-morning, the gates outside Royal Lodge had become the focus of national attention. Charles approved the statement only after reviewing every line. The monarch's property office, the department responsible for managing royal residences and access rights, had taken back full control of Royal Lodge. The disputed lease amendment was void. Camilla no longer held independent residential authority there. Broadcasters treated the decision as something larger than a family dispute. They described it as proof that closeness to the sovereign did not place anyone above royal procedure. That mattered because the crown depended on public trust, and public trust could not survive if private promises quietly became permanent privileges. One morning newspaper captured the crisis in a single brutal image. Its front page showed the closed gates of Royal Lodge beneath the headline, "The King Chooses the Crown." The words spread across television screens, breakfast tables, and crowded train platforms before the palace could shape the emotional meaning for itself. Camilla left through the side gate shortly before noon. Supporters had gathered near the Windsor estate boundary holding small Union flags, while reporters described the final vehicle carrying her away. The queen consort kept her eyes forward as cameras flashed, but her hand remained tightly closed around the edge of her handbag. Public opinion split immediately. Some saw Camilla's removal as a humiliating punishment imposed by her own husband. Others praised Charles for refusing to protect hidden privilege, simply because the person involved was his wife. The king watched the coverage privately until one commentator called the order a rejection of Camilla rather than a defense of royal authority. He turned off the television. William moved quickly to prevent the palace from making her the sole villain. The prince told officials that Sir Malcolm and the suspended private secretary had helped design and advance the arrangement. Camilla had accepted it, but she had not created the machinery alone. The palace then confirmed through its formal statement that Sir Malcolm had resigned, and that the Queen Consort's secretary would never again handle property matters. Charles approved the final wording, then paused. He added one sentence affirming Camilla's continuing role beside him. That line changed everything. The eviction was a boundary, not the end of the marriage. The gates of Royal Lodge had closed before the eyes of the nation, but the final judgment would be delivered in private, between a king who chose duty and a wife who had finally accepted the cost. The final conversation did not take place at Royal Lodge. It happened in the same palace room where Charles had first shown Camilla the hidden lease. The disputed papers were gone. The keys had been surrendered. Sir Malcolm had resigned, and the unauthorized clause had been formally erased. Only the consequences remained. When Camilla entered, the king stood to greet her not as an accused occupant, but as his wife. What followed would define both their marriage and his reign. Charles confirmed that the eviction was complete. Royal Lodge had returned to direct royal control, meaning every decision about the residence would now pass through the monarch's official property office. The amended lease had been permanently voided, and no hidden clause could restore Camilla's access. Camilla listened without interruption. Her household would be moved to approved accommodation under a clear arrangement that could not be changed through private promises. She then admitted that fear of the future had become an excuse for accepting power she had never been formally given. The king accepted his own share of responsibility. He admitted that his vague promise at Balmoral had created room for manipulation. Yet he made one truth unmistakable. Affection could never replace accountable authority. A marriage could survive uncertainty. The crown could not survive secret privilege. Camilla reached into her handbag and removed the final Royal Lodge key. She placed it in Charles's open hand. He closed his fingers around it, then set it aside rather than locking it away between them. The gesture ended the property dispute without turning the key into a symbol of permanent rejection. Charles did not remove her title. He did not end her public role. Instead, the monarch drew a lasting boundary between their marriage and the machinery of the crown. Camilla accepted reduced control over her property office and agreed that future household decisions would require independent authorization. William met his father afterward and supported the settlement. The prince understood that accountability had been enforced without becoming revenge. Charles had disciplined those responsible, protected the authority of the throne, and refused to destroy his wife simply to prove his strength. The palace then introduced a new rule requiring 2 verified approvals for every long-term occupancy change involving senior royals. That safeguard ensured no private promise could again be transformed into permanent privilege without lawful consent. Royal Lodge became the place where trust was broken, but also where a necessary line was restored. Camilla left diminished in authority, yet not destroyed. Charles emerged wounded, but stronger. Their marriage endured in a changed form. The unauthorized claim ended completely, and the monarchy survived because the king chose accountability over silence. The door to Royal Lodge closed behind Camilla forever, but in surrendering the house, she preserved her place beside the king, and Charles proved that even those closest to the throne must answer to the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.